Our last two speakers are Larry Godse and Mike Gold. Larry is the economist with the Center for Agroforestry, and Mike Gold is our associate director. And they will be speaking about specialty crop industries for the Midwest. So please welcome Larry and Mike.
I hope so. If this isn't me, I'll give Mike's talk and he can give mine. I saw a lot of faces when he said the economists from the center back there, they all perked up. They're eager to listen to economics, and I even heard one person say, good, this ought to be interesting. I hope it is. I realize that Mike and I stand between you and a good lunch, so we will keep this as exciting as possible. Today we're going to talk about one of the main focuses of the Center for Agroforestry is specialty crops. We do a lot of work with specialty crops. In fact, the people named on this slide, Dr. Gold, myself, Ina Chanushka, Ken Hunt, Michelle Warman, Mark Coggeshall, Johan Brun, Francisco Aguiar, Carla Barbieri, Chris Starbuck, Andy Thomas, Bruce Barrett, Terrell Stamps, and Chung Ho Lin all work in the areas of specialty crops in some way or another. And so it is a big focus of our center, and a lot of people say, well, why do we focus so much on specialty crops? And sometimes I say, why do we focus so much on specialty crops? There's a reason, and we want to talk about that today. The outline for this presentation, these are the 6 main points that we want to cover today. And first of all, we want to talk about the agricultural trends, especially in Missouri, but in the Midwest, for a large number of financially unsustainable small farms. This is a trend in the Midwest. Another one is a renewed focus on environmental concerns, and we're just going to touch on that briefly. There's also an increased interest in specialty crops for small farms. Some trends in the census data will show that there's emphasis in this. And along with this, a parallel line that's happening is an emphasis in consumer demand trends that support specialty crop industry growth, such as organic and things like that. We're also going to talk about UMCA, Center for Agroforestry's role in specialty crop development, where we feel our place and where we ought to be in this, and then what our needs are for future support and development of specialty crops. And so I'm going to start out talking about trends in agriculture. And for those of you in the back, this may be too small for you to see, but I put this up. This is a graphic that I got from the National Agricultural Statistics Service. And basically what it is land in farms. How many acres do we have in farms? And I have Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, and Illinois. And the only reason I put this up there is because I wanted to show you that, especially in Missouri, we only have about 29.1 million acres that are agriculture. And what they say by agriculture, the potential to earn at least $1,000 on your land, on your farm. So that would be considered agriculture. The average farm size, this is important. If you look at Kansas and Nebraska, Kansas was 705 acres as an average farm size, and Nebraska was 962, and I believe that data is skewed because of the western portions of those states. You have huge expanses of farmland out there. But what I want to focus on is mainly like Missouri and Iowa, where the average farm size in Missouri is 269 acres. That's the average farm size. And I'll hit on this a little bit more. That's pretty much a small farm. And then I also want to emphasize number of farms. If you look at the state of Missouri, we have the largest number of farms. So we have almost the smallest amount of farmland and the largest amount of farms, which means that we have the smallest average farm size. This is important. Number of farms also indicates number of farm operators. You know, we have a lot more small farmers, and this is the point I'm trying to make compared to the rest of the Midwest. Sorry, Dave, I didn't have Arkansas on here. I also want to point something out here. 45% of our farms in Missouri are less than 100 acres, 45%. And in fact, if you take number of farms below 260 acres, which is below our state average, that's about 74% of our farms in Missouri are below the state average farm size. and that's an important point to mention. What's happening with the trends in farm size here? I've got Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri, and as you can see that the trend has been to go to smaller farm sizes here in the last few years. It kind of peaked in about 1997 for most areas, but it's been dropping in terms of farm size, and I'll show more about this later on. More specifically in Missouri, the farm trend in Missouri for land, again, I say there's 29.1 million acres of farmland in Missouri according to the census data in 2008. And you can see since 1950, this data goes all the way back from 1950, we've lost about 6.9 million acres of farmland. I say we've lost it. It's land that's no longer being farmed. That could be urban sprawl. It could be fallow, land that's just gone to fallow. It could be, you know, other uses. But I want to point out especially this humongous drop here in the last 2 years. I don't know what's caused that, but I don't know if it's going to be an ongoing trend. But it may have something to do with the economy in the last few years. I don't know. Make sure I didn't miss anything. All right. In terms of average farm size, again, this is just in Missouri, and you can see that we've peaked in about 1997 and have declined over that time period. Farm size, again, the average farm size in 2008 was 269 acres in Missouri. So that leads to the other part of the assumption that we make. Okay, we got declining farm sizes, or a large number of small farms, and we also said they're unsustainable financially. And so that's what this graph represents. And this is a comparison of Missouri farm income to the U.S. poverty level, a good benchmark. We all want to make more than the poverty standard, right? And so that's the benchmark I use. Now, in terms of farm income, what I'm using here for farm income is market value of products grown on the farm. And let me explain this graph. If you look at the first bar over here, it says 28.3%. What that means is that 28.3% of our farms in Missouri have marketable product of less than $1,000. So, in other words, your potential to earn income on your farm, 28% of them earn less than $1,000. I use this indicator because it excludes all government payments and off-farm employment. And Carla's not here, but it does exclude agro-tourism, which is just a small factor. But if you total up all the categories of income that are below the poverty standard line, which is $22,000 and some change for a family of 4, that amounts to about 73% of Missouri farms can't even make enough money to exceed the poverty level. Again, this is also gross income. This is market value, so that would be gross income. So that tells you a little bit about the trend in Missouri to unsustainable financially, the farms that we have. If you want to compare that to other states, I thought this was kind of interesting too. You compare that to other states, Missouri's at 73%, Iowa was at 45.5%, Kansas was at 60.5%, and Nebraska was at 39.6%. That's the number of farmers in those states that have income potential below the poverty line for a 4-person family. I threw this slide up here because as a farmer, one of the things that you do when you get ready to plant is you look at the crop budgets and find out, okay, what am I going to expect to earn on my farm on a per acre basis? And these are the FAPRI budgets for 2010 already published. And I just wanted to highlight dryland corn. FAPRI's estimating that you're going to earn $150 an acre overall expenses. And for soybeans, you're going to earn $143 per acre overall expenses. And I'm an economist, so I have to use the term ceteris paribus. That's assuming that you're going to yield 155 bushels an acre and you're going to make $3.90 a bushel on your corn. That's the assumption that they make. One other small assumption that's in the fine print right up here, it says it reflects Missouri farms in the 2,000 acre range outside the boot hill. So if you have a smaller farm, of course, you make less than that because the economies of scale. So that's one of the things that we're looking at for small farmers, this is what they face every day. Another emphasis that comes from the statistical data is that the average farm net cash income for 2008 was $18,000 for the state of Missouri. $18,176. That's your average farm income for the state of Missouri. So I'll shift gears a little bit to the environmental side, and I only have a few slides because we're going to talk about ecosystem benefits and environmental issues quite a bit here. But I put these are land use slides, and basically the green area here, I know the legend is pretty small. The green area is cropland. This area is pasture land. Then you have woodland, miscellaneous uses, and then this right here is land that's in conservation programs. And I put these slides in here to show that we're shifting away from production agriculture like cropland, and we're going into more conservation uses for our land. It's a trend since 2002. And basically what's happened is since 2002, we've had a 41% increase in pasture land. That's land that was converted from cropland to warm season, cool season grasses. 41% increase in 5 years. And we've also had a 19% increase in land that's been put into conservation programs since 2002. I think this is an interesting idea because the most prominent conservation program that we have right now is the EQIP program, and EQIP is not included in land converted to conservation programs because it doesn't require a land easement in most cases. It's more of a management program. And so what we're talking about, land converted to conservation programs, that's land going into CRP, Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, WRP, Grasslands Reserve Program, and those kind of programs that require a land easement. So in a day and age where the EQIP program, which is the most prominent conservation program we still have a lot of people that are enrolling their land into long-term or easements of 10 to 15 years. Okay, a shift to specialty crops. Well, why specialty crops in Missouri? Mainly because farmers can't compete in the commodity products, and also in the apples and peaches, it's difficult for Missouri farmers to compete with outside growers. It's real difficult. Making a living from a traditional commodity production farm is extremely tough. One of the things I didn't mention earlier was that about 70% of farmers in Missouri identified the fact that they had off-farm employment. It's a necessity. Large acreage is available. I mentioned that the trend was for less farmland in Missouri. We actually, in 1950, had 30.1 million acres or 36 million acres of farmland in Missouri. Now we're at 29.1. That's a decrease of 6.9 million acres. It's land that was productive at one time and is now no longer even being farmed. That's available for other uses. And oftentimes specialty crops are profitable and provide alternatives for the family farm. The Agricultural Marketing Service of USDA defines specialty crops as fruits and vegetables, tree nuts, dried fruits, and horticulture and nursery crops, including floriculture. I'm going to exclude the vegetable portion of this when I talk about specialty crops. It's an important part, but being the Center for Agroforestry, we focus more on the tree crop side of it. Specialty crops are plants that are intensively cultivated. I wanted to throw this slide up. This is acres in 2007, acres in Missouri that we considered tree crops. There's 15,985 acres of nut crops planted in Missouri. Only about 2,000 acres of apples and 2,000 acres of peaches, and there's actually even 700 acres of berries. It's interesting that they even consider those numbers. But I wanted to pull out the nut side of it because it indicates that we in Missouri are not opposed to looking at nut industry or nut crops as an industry. The majority of our nut crops in Missouri are obviously pecan. And in 2002, we didn't even register the fact that we were growing chestnut in Missouri. Now we have 95 acres of chestnut showing up on the survey, so they're going to have to hire another statistician to keep track of those numbers. Emphasis in land and orchards. There's been a 29% increase in land that's been in orchards in the last 10 years. I think this is an interesting concept. Again, these are people that are looking for other uses for their land, and they're going towards orchard crops. And this is a self-created, with the help of Ina, map of the state of Missouri and where our orchard crops are, especially our nut crops. I only identified the counties that identified that they had at least 100 acres of some kind of a nut crop. And basically the yellow on the map is at least 100 to 300 acres of some kind of a nut or tree or orchard crop. The blue, which you don't have blue, the blue would be the orange, excuse me. The orange would be, it's funny how it does that. The orange is 300 to 500 acres of a tree or nut crop, and then the brown is over 500 acres. And if you look at the counties where you have over 500 acres of tree or nut crops, you shouldn't be surprised. You know, you have a big pocket of pecan growers in Sheraton County. You have a big pocket of apple and peach growers in Lafayette County. And then this whole area down here, you've got a huge contingent of pecan growers. So this should be no surprise. What is kind of interesting is you look over here in this area, and you think, well, what are they growing over there? I don't think they're growing pecans or any walnuts or anything like that. They throw grapes in with tree crops. So this would be your grape producers. Why, I don't know. But you notice that even in those counties where, you know, you've got the Herman, Missouri, and the wineries over there, they're still less than 300 acres of vineyard. So these are alternative crops. It's been growing. The next thing I want to talk about is consumer preference for specialty products. In the United States, we've seen an increase in the focus on healthy diets and healthy eating. Even the Food and Drug Administration has identified nuts as a food that's heart healthy and a food that they recommend instead of proteins high in saturated fat. So even we're getting emphasis from the government on the importance of nut crops for healthy eating. The other thing we look at is there's been a trend towards the buy local or local consumers. Based on our studies of the chestnut industry, we found that consumers are 20 times more likely to choose Missouri chestnuts. Missouri consumers are 20 times more likely to choose Missouri chestnuts compared to imported chestnuts. And we import about 5,000 tons or metric tons of chestnuts from Korea and China every year. So that's a market that we can, if we can produce those things, we can cut in on the import market. And then there's also a large growth in farmers markets, which also represents your buy local and those kind of things. So we can see a 13% increase in farmers markets. And then, of course, the organic trend. A lot of people are going towards organic. The organic has grown 20% annually since 1990. This is a huge increase in organic retail markets. And it's now about 3.5% of total food sales is organic. And this is the point where I will let Mike take over.
Let me just pick up from where Larry Godse left off, and I want to focus more on the specialty crops themselves and the things that we're doing here. There are some issues of concern. We've been doing this now for over 10 years, and there are some things that are evident in the specialty crop industry development that I wanted to bring to your attention. One of them is that many of the landowners who are planting new specialty crops, whether they be elderberry or the nut trees, they're taking a lot of risk because there's not a lot of information out there, there's not good market information, and they aren't necessarily working with improved germplasm, which can make a huge, huge difference. So we need better planting material, improved cultivars so that the landowners are working with the very best material possible. We need detailed financial decision-making information, and there aren't large knowledge networks out there. If you want to grow corn or soybeans, there are just dozens and dozens of outlets to find information. And if you want to grow chestnuts, you're going to end up right here. And that's not a good thing. We would like to have a lot more and broader information balance for chestnuts or elderberry or a lot of these other crops than is currently available. I wanted to pick up on this slide that Larry left off with, and I wanted to indicate that of that 16,000 acres that we've got of nuts, almost none of that is cultivars. It's almost all wild crop. The pecan is all wild crop. The black walnut is all wild crop. And as I'll show you a little bit later, the yield potential between a wild crop and a cultivated crop is very, very, very large. We're standing here today and it's about 0 degrees outside, or 5 below, or 10 above, or some very cold temperature. And the interesting thing is that while we don't like it, from my perspective, and I have a plant breeding, tree breeding background, it's a good thing. Because if you're going to plant an improved cultivar of anything, you're investing in these perennials for the long term. And the worst thing that could happen is if you're 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years down the road with your orchard and it's coming into production and the yields are good and you're making some money and everybody's happy, and then you find out you've planted something that wasn't tested for cold hardiness in your region. So a lot of the materials that we have that are being tested right now on our various farms around the state, they're undergoing the real good chill that they need. And the things that survive these kind of climatic conditions are the things that we can comfortably recommend to the landowner down the road. So what are the things we're working on? We're working on a whole suite of different crops, nut and fruit crops, chestnut, walnut, we're at the northern tier of commercial pecan production. We're working with elderberries, pawpaws, truffles, shiitake mushrooms, morel mushrooms, pine straw, and for a different day and a different seminar, we'll talk someday about eastern red cedar, which we don't eat. All right, so some of the things that we have that are ongoing in our state and in our region that are good news for Missouri and Midwest growth in specialty crop industries. One is eastern black walnut. We're the only state in the United States that has a program to genetically improve eastern black walnut for nuts. We're one of only 2 comprehensive programs in the country that do this with Chinese chestnut, and we have the best collection of germplasm material for chestnut, for black walnut, and also for northern pecan. We lead the nation in the work with elderberry in terms of research, outreach, and grower interest between University of Missouri and Missouri State University. And as far as I know, and Johan can correct me, but I think I'm right, we have the only public research program to try to develop grower applications for the European truffle in the whole country. All right, so we're taking a very comprehensive look at this. We aren't satisfied just with good germplasm, because good germplasm is a starting point, but it is not the ending point. So we are testing, developing, and deploying the best cultivars. We're looking at orchard production and management techniques. We're also looking at the markets. We're looking at the consumer side. We're looking at value-added research. We're interested in having the consumers be very aware of these products and actually be seeking them out in the grocery store. We call that the pull strategy. So if you're walking into the store and say, where can I get elderberry? And then the elderberry growers are being contacted by the grocers saying, can you source this for me? And then Terry Durham is a very happy guy, because that's what we want. So we're working to try to develop consumer interest and demand and create this pull strategy. We need financial models so that people know what they're getting into in terms of costs and returns. And also, we want to educate the grower so that they know how to grow these crops, and also promote clusters of growers so they can take advantage of economies of scale. Long-term goals are developing viable on-farm enterprises and developing thriving industries in Missouri and the Midwest. In terms of our chestnut, walnut, pecan, all of our trees are DNA fingerprinted. So we know very, very specifically the genetic background of all the material that we have, and that's very critical as we move forward looking for selection of various kinds of traits and who mom is and who dad is when we want to do breeding programs. We have production, field production, selection, and breeding research again for all these nut trees. And it's right now mainly at the Horticulture and Agroforestry Research Center in New Franklin, but it also exists at the Southwest Center down in the southwest part of the state. We have 65 cultivars of chestnut under test, and our top cultivars are producing reliably at an acre basis a ton of chestnuts or more per acre. In terms of black walnut, we now know that you can go from the nut to the nut in 5 years. And this is based on the best hybrids that Dr. Mark Cogswell has developed. It's the only place in the world that we've got this level and this advanced breeding program in walnuts. And let me just give you the one quick big picture that's at the bottom of that slide. The wild, 99% wild walnut crop that goes into Hammond's products that is harvested from all kinds of trees at all kinds of different stages of maturity, when they crack out 100 pounds of nuts, they get 7 pounds of nut meat. That's all they get. When you take those improved cultivars that Mark Cogswell is developing, you're going to get over 30 pounds of nut meat from the exact same amount of 100 pounds of nuts. It's a huge, huge improvement that we're going to see once we start deploying cultivars against wild nuts. Same thing with pecan. We have the largest northern pecan germplasm that Ken Hunt is tracking in concert with Bill Reed down at Chitopa, Kansas. We have over 100 cultivars under test at a couple different locations. Well, the main location is at Hark, but we also collaborate again with Chitopa. And what we know, for example, is that the cultivar Kanza is the best cultivar for our region for the northern limit of pecan production. These crops can be grown in agroforestry configurations like alley cropping. So down in southeast Kansas, they're alley cropping with pecan, and you see there a double row system in the 4th year with spring oat intercrop. Just north of here in Clifton Hill, Dan Shepard has pioneered pecan intercropping, alley cropping for the last 25 years. So you can see that his trees are a little bit larger there, and he shifted from corn and soybeans to bluegrass, and he harvests and sells the hay in the spring in between his pecan trees, and he has a nice surface to pick up the nuts. But he's very diversified. He also has buffalo. He also has eastern gamma grass, and it's a very diversified, not so small farm, but his pecans represent 200 acres of his operation. So in terms of consumer and market research, again, we want this pull strategy. We want to increase demand, so by the time many of us are putting these orchards and this acreage into production, there is demand for that product already waiting and hungry. So we are doing market research, we are doing consumer research, and we're also in many cases selling out there in the marketplace so that we can talk real dollars and cents with the landowners, not just something in theory. Working with Larry Godse and many others, we're developing these user-friendly, Excel-based specialty crop financial models so we can nail down the costs and the benefits under different scenarios for these specialty crops, the kind of information that the grower needs. And then, of course, get the word out. We are interested, and we do a lot of technology transfer in collaboration with a lot of other groups. We created the Missouri Chestnut Roast 7 years ago, so we bring about 4,000 people out to New Franklin 1 day a year. We sell at the farmers market. We work with local growers, and we've developed a lot of information for point-of-sale displays and for the public and for landowners about these crops. And then finally, if you put it all together, you want to teach the growers how to grow. So this year, for example, we had a 4-part workshop series on how to grow chestnuts, and we are collaborating with all of the relevant players in our industry like the Hammond's Products, Black Walnut Company, Missouri Northern Pecan Growers, Forest Keeling Nursery, and professional associations like the Chestnut Growers of America, the Northern Nut Growers, and the Missouri Nut Growers. Another crop that we're very, very excited about is elderberry, the sambucus. And there are new, not from northern New York, there are new locally developed heavy-bearing varieties that were developed both from Mountain Grove and from the Southwest Center that are now out there in the marketplace, like Bob Gordon and Wildwood. The largest elderberry winery in the country is right outside of Wichita, Kansas, called Wildwood Cellars. And for those of you that enjoy wine, they have anywhere from very dry to very sweet. The The largest planting of elderberry in Missouri is right here in Boone County, and the individual in charge of that is sitting at the middle table right over there, Terry Durham. Many value-added opportunities with elderberry, like wine and juice and concentrate and nutraceuticals, and they're very well suited both to an alley cropping or a riparian forest buffer configuration. Again, we're looking at shiitake, truffle, and morel, and the truffle is the one that has the real high value. And we do collaborate, for example, with Ozark Forest Mushrooms, which is a large log-grown shiitake mushroom producer here in the state. And the value of shiitake is very high, and there's very few producers in the country. Larry was talking about yields and value of per acre for corn or for soybeans. Well, you can imagine once we get this deployed, if you're getting 40 pounds per acre and you get $200 a pound gross, that's not a bad return on a very small farm once you successfully deploy your truffiere, your truffle orchard. Something else we're working on that seems fairly straightforward, and I know down in the southeast is old hat, but it isn't in our part of the country, and that's simply to use the needle fall from pine trees as a mulch. We call it pine straw. So again, we've been for the last 15 years looking at selecting cold, hardy loblolly pine. We have no native pine right here in this part of the state. Our only pine is in the southeast part of the state. It's called shortleaf pine, and shortleaf pine doesn't work real well for baling into pine straw. So we're looking at cold, hardy loblolly as well as hybrids between pitch and loblolly pine. We're now getting some improved seed orchards under development, and we know from our own farm at New Franklin that you can, by the 8th year, be harvesting 100 to 200 bales per acre, wholesale for $4 a bale, and retail $8, $10, $12 a bale. We hear a lot from the USDA, your head is spinning when you hear about biomass and biofuels and all that great stuff. But that also means that some of the traditional materials that have gone into lower end use like mulch, like bark mulch, they're going to be gone, they're going to be burned up into biomass. So what are we going to mulch with? Well, we're going to mulch with pine needles. So there's a really good market opportunity here as we see these other mulches getting burned up to heat up our homes. Okay. Andy Mason talked about some of these opportunities, and Ranjith and Steve Anderson were talking about this. There's a big issue of non-point source pollution, hypoxia in the Gulf. There's a big suite of federal support programs like CRP, EQIP, WIP, that basically take land out of production and put them into, in some cases, agroforestry configurations. The problem with those programs is you are not allowed to actively manage and earn income off those areas that are in set-aside programs. So that means the government outlays money for 10 or 15 years. Fine, we get some social and environmental benefit, but if you choose to pull it out of there, boom, it's over. So our investment is right down the tubes. But what if the incentive was you can actively manage these, you can harvest these, and if you make money, your cost share, your set-aside goes away. So you're actively managing and you have an incentive to maintain these perennials over the long term. That's the policy change we need to get these linear buffers earning money. So we've seen this whole idea. We know that buffers will have a big impact on reducing hypoxia. A well-designed buffer, for example, that our colleagues at Iowa State have developed in Bear Creek, Iowa, and you can produce woody florals or elderberries in those places where those red lines are. Those are linear farming opportunities that could be farmed over the long term and profitable. Let's take a quick look at woody florals, which has been developed by our colleagues up in Nebraska. There's an image right there of a buffer a la Iowa State University with stiff stem grasses, shrubs, and then various trees up against the creek. Well, if you're allowed to harvest and manage this, what we found is that you can earn $3,000 to $7,500 per acre from these riparian buffers, and you can see what they look. You can see what they look like right there. They coppice. They're perennials. They're permanent in the landscape. They could be in buffers, in alley cropping, or even in windbreaks. There's all kinds of opportunities to deploy these and make money in the floral market while improving environmental quality. One of the big growth areas that's taken off is the winery area. So we've grown from 37 to 93 wineries over the last 15 years just in our own state, And if you look at the data on surrounding states, they've all grown very rapidly. This is another perennial. It grows nicely in these river hill soils. And how are they supporting the growth of this industry? Well, we passed a wine tax here a number of years ago, so that every bottle of wine that any of us buy supports the market and the research for long-term growth of that industry. That's the kind of thing that's necessary to grow these specialty crops. The other thing is, when you deploy these grapes, you get a very, very lovely landscape, whether you're in Napa Valley, California, or along the Missouri River in Hermann, Missouri. So if you look at agritourism, which is sort of a spin-off of deploying agroforestry and specialty crops in the landscape, you find that it's a very appealing landscape, that you have a large number of people that like to go to those farms. You have wildlife observation, you have hunting fees, you have leisure tours, educational tours, U-pick operations, field rides, and so on, because you've created this landscape which really is based out of specialty crops deployed in the landscape. So where do we go? What do we need to move forward with specialty crop industries? First of all, this has got to be entrepreneur-based. This cannot be subsidy-based if it's going to take off and really go. We need good market information. We need private sector investment in these kinds of perennial cropping systems. We need both top-down support from the government, for example, the Specialty Crop Research Initiative, Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food. We need reworked incentive programs, and very importantly, this should be driven by the landowner from the bottom up. The Sustainable Ag Research and Education Program out of USDA, the SARE program, RC&Ds, and Extension. There are various organizations that are now providing private capital like RSF and a new thing called Slow Money to provide capital to create the infrastructure for local food systems. Andy mentioned, and I think it's really relevant, this whole idea about Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food, USDA-wide effort to create new economic opportunities connecting consumers with local producers, spot on for specialty crop development. There is the Specialty Crop Research Initiative. When I heard about this, I was dancing in the aisles. I thought, this is the greatest thing. This is really going to support the launch of all these crops that we've talked about here in the last 20 minutes. Because what's their purpose? Develop, disseminate the science to address the needs of specific crops and regions. $50 million of funding a year. So there's the smiley face. And then comes the grim reality. You have to have a one-to-one match. This is the only grant I know that if you don't come up with your own money, you can't get any money. So who benefits from this? Only the large commodity specialty crops. So the walnut growers out in California, they got tons of money. The wine growers in Missouri, they have money. The apple growers in Washington State, they have money. Does the chestnut growers have any money? No. Elderberry growers have, black walnut growers. But there's the reality. So they're almost there for our purposes, but not quite, because we have to deal with the match issue. So what else do we need to move forward? We need one-to-one tech transfer. Very, very effective to have farmers speaking with farmers. We also need long-term targeted research, which is the kind of thing that the center has been doing for the last 15 years. We need active partnerships. We may need co-ops and grower clusters. We need to be thinking about value-added products the minute we plant any of these crops in the ground, because we're going to need to find new ways to use these products to be able to sell what we hope will be a lot of volume down the road. We need a lot of knowledge networks. We need so that there's very detailed groups of people who can provide all of the answers to the questions that you might need for whatever specialty crop you want to grow. And we need consumer education. That little picture right there is out of Australia. They've developed their own chestnut industry over the last 20 years, and one of the things that they're doing is they're now creating a peeled frozen chestnut product. And so if you've ever dealt with the chestnuts and fresh chestnuts and you have to score them and you have to cut them and you have to do all this work, that's fun if you've got a pound. But if you want to sell chestnuts to every Olive Garden restaurant in the United States for a fall specialty something, they're not going to peel those things. And most Americans don't peel anything anyway. We have baby carrots that are pre-peeled and in a Ziploc bag. And so it's going to be a different kind of a product, and we need to have the equipment there to be able to do this in the future. Okay, so this is just a wrap-up slide, that there are small farms shifting to specialty crops to remain or become financially viable. And the consumer trends are supporting this for health and for nutrition and for local foods and so on. And we are providing some of the leadership development in this area, and for the long term, stable funding will be required both for the long-term research as well as to support industry development. So, questions for me, for Larry? Stunned into silence. Or sleep. Sorry, Larry.
Well, thank you, Mike. And
A question from Andy? Wait for the mic. Microphone.
You kind of touched on it at the end there, Mike, but yeah, I guess that's my question. Thinking about this chestnuts, and I also made me think of the kiwi, what they did with that. But it seems like that's an area for focus to figure out what consumers really want. How do you get them so that they're wanting chestnuts, black walnuts, elderberries, and they're not thinking of them in some really limited way?
A great deal of that is exposure. And again, I quickly flipped through, for those of us here, we're familiar with it, but our chestnut roast. 7 years ago, and we've been tracking the feedback of the people at the chestnut roast for the last 7 years. When we first started this chestnut roast, overwhelmingly no one had everybody can tell you the first line in the song. Let's start to sing it right now. But beyond that, they knew nothing. And over time, that graph is shifting where more and more people, whether they've been there before or not, are familiar with chestnuts and are excited about them. And slowly but surely, we're actually tracking the fact that people are beginning to buy 1 or 2 or 3 or more times per year, and we've been tracking that longitudinally for 7 years. So we know this. And like any other crop, I mean, we've had so many new crops come into our market over the last 3 decades. I mean, jicama, in the 1960s, there were no kiwis and so on. But people need to be exposed to these things, and when they're exposed to them, at least many of them, not all for any crop, will taste them, like them, and we're interested in diversifying our palate. There's no question. That's very obvious from what you see in the marketplace. But it is consumer exposure on an ongoing basis, and a lot of that, though, is that farmers markets are good exposure places, as well as on-farm, and there's a lot of this whole small farm universe that is re-emerging after 60 years of dormancy, exposes people to these kinds of things, and they're excited about it. 30 or 40 years ago, we didn't go to wineries. They weren't anywhere. Where did you go? But now they're all over the place. So it's exposure. This might be for you, Larry.
I think this question is for both of you, but actually for anybody of the 4 presenters too. As Larry was mentioning in the statistics, there is a change in the structure of farmers or landowners, and the incentives of the new landowners or the smallholder landowners is changing. Their interests are changing. Their use of the land is changing. On the other hand, Mike, you mentioned the fact that current laws do not allow you to, there is the separation between conservation and production for profit. And so if the base of the landowners is changing, and at the same time we need to move forward policies that change those incentive structures to allow people to plant riparian buffers or any other types of practices for conservation, but that in the medium term can be shifted into production for market for specialty crops. How do we start to understand who are the key stakeholders in negotiations for the next farm bill that will allow us to move in that direction?
Andy Mason, you want to come up here? Here, you pick yourself up on the microphone.
Well, I think the first thing to do, and this might be something the center might want to do, is look at the current farm bill. And you have people like Doug Wallace here from NRCS, and Missouri is one of the leaders in implementing the farm bill. And I think it does vary by program on where those limitations are, so to speak, on active agroforestry. But I think now is an ideal time. The Farm Bill is a little over a year being implemented, and it won't be long, another year or two, the discussions are going to start talking about the next Farm Bill. And this would be a great time to learn about how it's being implemented, what the law says, how the agencies are implementing it, and see whether there is. And I just got to believe, that's why I put it up there as one of my 6 actions. I think this is an opportunity, but it's got to be thoughtful. You know, there's a lot of good things in the Farm Bill, and I think every Farm Bill we're always looking to take it to the next level. And I think this is the next level we're talking about. Yeah, we ought to hear from Doug on this.
Well, I just want to comment on the programs that we mentioned previously. Really, CRP is the only program where there's restrictions. With EQIP and WIP, WRP, GRP, landowners are free to set up production facilities and use their practices that we cost share with in an environmentally sensitive way, but also they can use it for production purposes.
So you can plant a curly willow cultivar and you can coppice it every year and you can make money off that if you have one of these conservation contracts?
If you get to the market with it, yes.
I've
And-
not
but,
heard
but,
any-
but not under CRP. Under EQIP, under WIP, even WRP, we allow timber harvesting under WRP, providing it's under a compatible use authorization.
And you can also plant a pecan grove and you can harvest your pecans off the
Yes, you
bottom?
could.
I'm glad I came here today.
It could be, though, there's a perception, and that perception might
Right, your comments that there's a,
be as important as, what it says, and how do we
Right.
overcome that?
right, well, Andy commented that the perception that you can't is important. Obviously, I have that perception. Of course, the other thing, and Andy, you mentioned that, is just educating Doug Wallace's colleagues and all the others around the state that these are viable things that landowners ought to be doing, and they need to feel more confident in order to recommend them, which is where you recommended an agroforestry academy or whatever your term was, which I think is a great idea. Other things while we hold you away from lunch.